to my motto, nothing's ever holding back.
Welcome to the Lone Road iRacing podcast. I'm your host, Guy Robertson, and today we've got a very special guest joining us from Australia, from Melbourne. Welcome everybody, Brendon McDonough. Brendon, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners and the viewers?
Sure, thanks Guy, thanks for having me on. My name's Brendon, obviously. I've been iRacing for just over 3 years now. Not my first experience in sim racing, but it did have quite a break for many years. I used to race sports car GT back in the early 90s, late 90s. That was good fun. We had an online worldwide head-to-head league that was heaps of fun, just with kids and everything that came along. The hobbies tend to take a back seat until you've got more time and money to do them. So that was me.
Okay, so did you do any other sim racing before iRacing?
Yeah, certainly Sports Car GT was a big one. Loved that game. Just something about it was a good fit. Obviously everyone tries your Gran Turismos and your Forzas and things like that, but they all seemed a little bit arcadey.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There's just something that is not a simulator, it's more of a game. Okay, brilliant. Talk to me briefly about your setup.
So I started off with just a cheap Logitech G29 just to see, whether I'd still enjoy sim racing. That got me hooked again. I've been playing VR for many years, so I already had a VR headset. Then upgraded to a proper sim rig. I started with a Next Level Racing GT track. Then eventually migrated to a direct drive wheel. I've got running the Logitech G Pro. And then as my 50th birthday present to myself, I splashed out and got the DOF Reality H6 motion platform behind me there.
Wow. So I'm a triple screen. I've tried VR and it made me a bit ill pretty quickly within five laps. So yeah, VR's not for me and it's not for everybody, but you've got a motion rig and VR. So for the viewers and their listeners, what's the immersion factor with both those coming together?
It's absolutely night and day. If the one thing with, as I said, I've been using VR for a long time, and the thing that probably creates the most motion sickness in people is either stuttery frame rate or when you are being moved by something beyond your control. So say, for example, a classic one that a lot of people try out when they first try out VR is a roller coaster simulator, which is possibly the worst thing you can do because your body is anticipating G-forces that aren't actually there. So that is what gives you the motion sickness. With the motion platform, as long as you've got motion compensation built into it, which is basically offsetting the movement of the platform against the movement of your headrest, your headset, you do feel those G-forces and movements, admittedly not quite as severe as in a real race car, but because you're controlling it, you're anticipating those movements, so you don't get the motion sickness.
Ah, wonderful. Now, I've seen one of your videos on YouTube, in a spec racer. I think it was at Road America. Absolutely brilliant footage. But it just shows, for me anyway, and if viewers want to go and look you up on YouTube, the amount of movement that is going off in that sim rig you've got there. So it looks great fun. How do you feel when you've had an intense race like that coming off the rig?
Oh, it's actually exhausting sometimes. If you've had a really intense race, especially in a car like the Skip Barber, for example, that has no power steering, and you've got a good direct drive wheel, and you're hitting curbs and you're jumping over ripple strips and racing wheel to wheel, it is a workout. The movements you can see in the videos that I make are the bumps and the sudden jerks. The really subtle movements that I can feel are too small to really come up on video. You can't see them happening, but I can definitely feel them through the seat of my pants.
And that's that you know what every iRacer is looking for, that level of intensity as well.
Oh, absolutely. There's a few places on tracks that I really think to myself, gee, this thing makes a difference. Coming through the corkscrew at Laguna Seca, through the dipper at Bathurst, Sunset at Sebring, there's a really, really big bump mid-corner. There are places like that where it really makes you feel in the track.
And how does it feel with the new range system? It's still, for iRacing, pretty new, but I can imagine large puddles as you're coming out of into a corner onto a straight that, from an aquaplaning point of view, how does the rig feel with that?
Probably the motion rig doesn't portray that particularly distinctly. You get more feedback through the steering wheel itself. Insofar as loss of grip from a wet track. But it's still the difference between a dry track and a wet track. A wet track almost feels a bit glidier, a bit smoother. You don't get as much vibration and jarring.
So that's maybe something, do you think, that iRacing could work on, or the rig and its software? Do you think they're missing a little bit there?
There's always room for improvement, I guess. I mean, if you were to look at a system like this as something that's going to make you faster, no, it's not going to make you faster. It is purely an immersion thing. I've heard interviews with Max Verstappen, who does a lot of sim racing, saying a motion rig will make you slower. Well, if you're Max Verstappen, it probably would, but for us mere mortals, it is a help, and it's not so much about making you faster; it's more making you feel more connected with the car and the track, and it really, really helped with my consistency. On any given track, once the tyres are warm, my lap times without incident are within a tenth or two of each other, lap after lap after lap. And that's mainly due to the fact that I am absolutely plugged into the thing, and I can turn my head and spot the apex and things like that.
Wonderful. And if one of our viewers, or a couple of viewers or listeners, are thinking of investing in a motion rig, what they're looking at as a general cost?
I investigated quite a lot of different systems when I was choosing one. They range wildly from a couple of $1,000s up to tens of thousands of dollars. And there's lots of different configurations as well. There's 2-axis, 3-axis, 6-axis. It all depends on your budget, obviously, what you intend to use it for, because there's a lot of people that use it only for flight sims. There's a lot of people that use it only for sim racing. there's plus and minuses to the different configurations. But in a nutshell, by the time I paid import taxes and exchange rates and things like that, the H6 from DOF Reality, which I imported from the Ukraine directly from them, cost me about 12,500 Australian dollars.
Okay, folks and listeners, so those who need to start saving for a motion rig, get stuck in. Those who've got cash to flash, that's your cost you're going to have to lay down, and as Brennan's just took us through. So, myself and Brennan were thinking and talking, and we're going to make the rest of this podcast a little bit more of an Australian podcast with a deeper insight into the tracks, the popular tracks as well, and then we're going to go into another section that is going to talk about the tracks that currently are in Australia but aren't on iRacing, that maybe could be or should be. So we're going to get into that now. So Brendan, we've got, and let me just read these out. We've got probably the newest that's come to iRacing recently, the Bend. We have Winton, Sandown, Oran Park, that's sadly not even a track anymore, Phillip Island, and the infamous Bathurst, currently on iRacing. So if we're going to go through, I'm going to start with the newest, the Bend. What do Australians think of the Bend?
Well, the Bend is probably our newest track, both on iRacing and in real life. So the Bend was built from the ground up by a gentleman and his company and family called Samir Shahin, or Sam Shahin, who, if you watch Porsche Carrera Cup, he's a regular competitor in that, loves his motorsport. It's a big track, lots of configurations. I personally haven't got around to getting that one on iRacing yet, so I haven't driven it in iRacing. But from what I know of the track, it's got some fast flowing sections, some really tight technical sections. The V8 supercars obviously do around there. It's a place that will challenge you.
Well, I've been lucky enough. I'm one of these who buy most of the new gizmos when iRacing gods pass them on to us and give us the opportunity. I enjoyed it, and how I learnt it, because it's I think it's the second biggest track on iRacing, just shy of the Nürburgring. I raced it in segments, so and maybe this was some tactical genius from iRacing. The smaller cars were on it first, doing the smaller section of the track. Then, as the weeks progressed, it got to bigger cars on the longer sections of the track. So it actually built up the learning of the track bit by bit. What my takeaway was, there's some blind summits. So the first learning laps, as I call them, where you ain't got a clue where you're going, there's lots of off tracks, as you can imagine. But actually, the track is really good. And it's, for me, good that we've got another track that potentially could host the longer endurance races as well, because there's lots of track on the main, full course, where you could probably easily get 60 cars on, GT3s, prototypes, etc.
Well, they do run the full course in the GT3 series in real life, so it's perfectly suited for that.
Yeah. So, viewers, listeners, if you've not got the Bend at the moment, and if you've got some cash to splash, it's definitely worth going and pressing that buy button and getting yourself on that track. So, we're going to move on now to one that I'm not too familiar with. I raced it, I think, Winton.
Yes, Winton is a track that most of the tracks in Australia are quite old. They date back to the 70s, 80s, some even older. Winton is definitely one of those. It's gone through a couple of changes over the decades. It's in the absolute middle of nowhere in rural Victoria. So the main interstate freeway that runs between Melbourne and Sydney, it's pretty much smack in the middle of that. So it has got good access, but it is literally the only thing there for miles around. Very tight, narrow, twisty, technical track. Probably best suited to lower power, club level type cars like your MX-5 and your Ray FF1600, which do compete there in real life. They have classic motorsport festivals there every year. It used to be around at the V8 Supercars Champion, but I think those cars have outgrown that track now.
I can imagine. I have raced Winton a few times. It's always interesting on iRacing anyway. There's always some. Usually you get the lap 1 chaos, as we all know, but yeah, you get a bit of chaos through the race as well. And I've even driven it in some light rain, which brings another game changer to it as well. So I think going into corner 1, especially at the start, lap one psychopaths, still going in red hot. I think the brakes are going to hold on, and it's quite a short straight, but the first corner is pretty medium to slowish corner, and everybody seems to either have a crash or go straight on. So, it's another one. It's probably, I think, from the numbers point of view on iRacing, it's definitely one that's popular for, like you said, the smaller cars. It gets the D-class license drivers through to A-class, so it's quite popular, I think.
Absolutely. A larger, more powerful car just hasn't got the room to really stretch its legs at Winton, which is possibly why it's not used for the top level of motorsport in this country now.
Yeah, which I suppose, like you said, if the cars have got too much power now and they're not really utilising the potential of it, then it's not really gonna take hold, is it? So Sandown then, moving on to Sandown. Again, a track that's still pretty new, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong, is this the one with a horse race track in the middle of it?
That's correct. So that's what you would call my local track, I suppose. I live probably 30 minutes away from Sandown. I've been there lots of times to watch professional and amateur motorsport there. You're right, it does have a horse racing track smack in the middle of it, and that's possibly why it has survived for as long as it has, because it is right in the middle of suburbia now. The urban sprawl has started to swallow up the areas around it. Every year when the V8 supercars are there, everyone says, oh, this could be the last year at Sandown. It just keeps coming back. Whilst it's still financially viable, I think it'll still be a thing, but it is a very old historic track in the heart of Melbourne, and it's a lot of fun. I've been there lots of times before. It's great as a spectator track. You can see most of the track from anywhere. And it's good fun to race too. The curbs are unforgiving.
Oh yeah, I know that.
Yeah. Now, the version on iRacing, turn 6 at the top of the hill. As it is in real life now, the runoff area there is asphalt. That is a recent addition. Previously, it was grass, and if you came off at turn 6, you were into the wall hard. It was a car eater. There's lots of footage of people coming unstuck at turn 6 at Sandown, and it's never pretty.
Yeah. And in iRacing, it's pretty much the same. You hit one of those curbs, your car is either out of control or it spins you round and off you go. And there's a little section that it's quite hard to explain because I'm not so privy with the track like your good self. But there's a straight section, might be the back straight coming towards the end of the lap, and then there's a downhill section that is still pretty quick, but you have to slow up for a little bit like a mini S's. For me, that was so difficult to get your entrance, your accelerator, brake balance, getting through there to get a good exit.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's another spot where people come unstuck quite a lot.
Yeah, I can believe it as well, because I'm struggling to get that. You very get swallowed up for the drivers who know that track better. You get swallowed up on the start grid pretty much straight away because you've got so much loss of momentum. But it's interesting to. I think this is the only track I know of in iRacing where it's got something else that could be going off at the same time in the middle of the track, the horse track. It's for me. I don't think there's another track in iRacing that's got another sport right in the centre of it.
Yeah, well, obviously they don't conduct the horse races and the car races at the same time. I don't think the horses like that, but it is definitely a unique multi-purpose facility.
Yeah, brilliant. So that's Sandown, folks, if anybody's interested in that. Now, going on to the next one, Oran Park.
I know this is one of your favourites.
It is, number 2 in my list.
Yeah, Valet Oran Park. It's obviously a housing estate now, but it was still a racetrack only about 15 years ago. Once again, another very old historic track in Australia. Extremely unique, especially because it's one of the few tracks in the world that crosses over itself. So I can, off the top of my head, I can only think of, say, the old Monza and probably Suzuka that actually cross over themselves with a bridge. And, of course, Oran Park. Turn 1-2 obviously takes a lot of commitment and bravery to get the maximum speed out of. And many in iRacer will know the gravel trap on the outside of those turns intimately well.
Yes, and you're right. It's always a heart in your mouth moment, lap 1, lap 2, blah, 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 every lap. And it doesn't get easier because you start to catch up the back markers as well, who have struggled anyway at the start, and you get a second phase of chaos and wrecking and interest as well. And it really does test an iRacer's skill of your brake, accelerator, and trail braking around those first 2 corners. I think the designer of the track, whoever that may be, you might know, absolute genius for that level of intensity for a driver early on in the race as well.
Absolutely. If you want to learn trail braking, Oran Park's the place you should start.
Yeah, no, I love that track. It's got challenges for the veteran drivers and the aliens, and for a new driver, you learn so much about what kind of skills you need to improve. And there's not too many tracks out there, and I can think there's probably like 3 or 4 that I would recommend highly to anybody new, to say these are the ones where they're popular to race, so you're not going to be up with the aliens, shall we say, in your little split, because there's only 10 drivers. You're going to be in with roughly the same level as you are, which doesn't put you under too much pressure, but it does give you that pull to sharpen your skills, learn from other racers, and learn about blind summits, braking early, turning in. You name it, it's there. And like you said, going over that bridge is actually a really difficult section. I'm not going on the bridge itself, but leading into it and coming out of it. They're both tricky little complexes that aren't flat out, but can affect your lap time very, very, a hell of a lot.
Absolutely. I think the fact that they're not flat out and you do have to carry some form of throttle to be fast, but not flat out. That's where you learn a lot of throttle control and anticipating what speed you're going to need getting to a corner and coming out of a corner.
Wonderful. So we're going to leave Oran Park and we're going to talk about Phillip Island.
Another track that is what you would call local to me. I live probably about an hour away from Phillip Island. Probably Phillip Island and Bathurst are the two tracks in Australia that are most internationally known, obviously for their World Championship status, I suppose, although Bathurst doesn't really have a World Championship, but Phillip Island certainly does with the MotoGP and superbikes. Phillip Island is another place I've gone to spectate on a number of occasions. And it looks just as it does on the sim. You've got the ocean in the background. It's very windy there, but the wind tends to come head on up the main straight. So that can, in real life, add to a lot of drafting weirdness where, depending on how strong that wind is, it can either make your draft really accentuated, or if there's not much wind at all, it can be very minimal. But if you get a crosswind there, it can be diabolical. I've spoken to people that have raced there on a day where there's a crosswind and the wind can just pick up the car and take it right across to the other side of the track before they gather it up.
Wow.
Which would be spooky.
Yeah, I can imagine that in VR, in your rig.
Yeah, well, luckily the wind in iRacing, as much as it's a factor, it's not gusty. It is constant, so you adapt to it pretty quickly. I think that would be an interesting thing for iRacing to maybe look at bringing in the next weather update is gustiness of wind, because that would certainly make for some interesting times at windy places.
Yeah.
But Phillip Island is another really fast-flowing, windy track. There's a little bit of everything, but its big draw card is the fact that the corners are so big and fast and flowing, and they do, to a certain degree, lead into each other. So you are linking corners together and making sure that, okay, maybe you've got to sacrifice this corner to gain entry speed on the next corner. And it's an easy track to drive, but a really hard one to master.
And what I recall I like Phillip Island. It's a track that I will race. Couple of difficult ones. Definitely the airpin. I can't remember what turn number is, but it's pretty early in the lap. Very difficult because you're coming off nearly flat out top speed. And in iRacing, you see lots of drivers overshooting lap 1, 2, 3, and even if you're pushing for an overtake, trying to come down the inside of somebody, there's a lot of contact at that point. And then you've got the little section over the hump, which, if you don't know the track, catches lots of people out. And so there's lots of good runoff areas as well. I think that's what draws people in as well. They are on iRacing anyway. It's not something that we're going to talk about in a minute, which is, fatal if you don't stay on the track. So good fun, and I always enjoy that view. And like you mentioned, the ocean, or I don't know what it is, but it shimmers on iRacing, and I wonder how many iRacers have been looking at that rather what's going on in the race and going straight on.
Definitely, maybe. You're right. That downhill braking up over the hill at Lukey Heights down into MG, that is steeper than you think.
Yeah.
So braking downhill like that can catch you out very quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And as you said, the hairpin, if you are coming around that left-hand complex and you go wide and you're on the grass, you are going to collect somebody at that hairpin, and it happens in real life too. There was a big one a number of years ago on the V8 supercars where a driver by the name of Nick Percat got out onto the grass and just could not stop the thing and completely T-boned James Courtney and like lifted the whole car off the ground. It was a big one.
Yeah. It happens, doesn't it? That's the risk of any motorsport, especially the competitive stuff that the real world racers go through. Okay, so moving on to the one that's probably the most well known, Bathurst. Another track that I would say is my number one for points gathering. Immersion recently last week and last week's podcast was all about it. The FF 1600 in 9% rain, absolute. Yeah, for me, my eyes were popping out my head after the races for the amount of concentration. So I'm going to hand Bathurst over to you to kind of tell us what Australian thinks about Bathurst itself.
Well, what can be said about Bathurst that isn't already bleedingly obvious? But obviously, Bathurst is a legendary track in Australia. The Bathurst 1000 held in October, which was just last weekend. It's obviously the premier motorsport event in Australia. It gets more viewership than the Formula One Grand Prix in Melbourne. It is a monstrous track. You talk to any other person who's come from overseas and come to Bathurst for the first time, their eyes are out on stalks. They just can't believe what they're seeing. It combines so many of the tricky elements in circuits all around the world, all in one place. It's got the fastest corner in Australia, the longest straight in Australia, the highest top speed in Australia, the biggest elevation change. It's literally got everything, and it's one of those places that you will never do the perfect lap around there. It rewards commitment, but it punishes mistakes badly. There is nowhere that you can have a small accident at Bathurst. If you come unstuck, it's going to hurt.
Yeah, and it does in the real world and in our world. Oh, yeah, on iRacing, you come off there, you start confident, and after, we've all seen people on turn one going off, hitting each other, and that's a pretty simple corner, really. Last week in the rain, it wasn't simple. There was deep puddles on the right-hand side, which thinned that exit by probably getting on for 70%. So, yeah, and everything else unfolded after that. So, my enjoyment, and it is total enjoyment when I'm racing at Bathurst, is the risk and reward. You miss your braking point by an inch, and you're not going to slow that car down. You're going to hit a barrier. Let's say coming out of Forest Elbow, for example. There isn't much space there, and to get the best run out, you need to be as close to that hoarding on the right-hand side on exit to get the best shot of an overtake, or just keeping your fellow competitor behind you coming down the fast. I think it's Conrod Straight, isn't it? So let's just talk about where Bathurst is then, and because what I can see on iRacing, it's all set around vineyards. Is that right?
Kind of. So Bathurst itself is a town that's about 2 hours inland from Sydney in New South Wales. You've got a mountain range between Bathurst and Sydney, the Blue Mountains. So that inland tablelands area is relatively flattish for the most part, and Mountain Panorama kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in the middle of nothing. Yeah, it is farmland basically, all around it. There is a couple of vineyards there, which are historically accurate on iRacing, but yes, it is a rural area. But yeah, the Bathurst itself is quite a large town.
Okay, well, that's my number one. Where does all those tracks sit, do you think, with yourself and, Australian iRacers?
Well, certainly, I think if you ask most iRacers, Bathurst would be number one. It was certainly one of the first tracks I purchased on iRacing, and if I'm trying out a new car, that's one of the tracks that I will give it a zip around to see how it feels. I've done countless laps there. I will often jump into a random race at Bathurst, even in a car I'm not familiar with, just because I am very familiar with the track. What I'd love to see is for iRacing to do a series similar to the Ringmeister, but at Bathurst. You could call it King of the Mountain if you wanted. Similar format, different car each week, same track. That would be fantastic.
Totally agree.
So I think, I think Bathurst would be most people's number one. Number two for me would probably be a toss-up between Oran Park and Phillip Island. Then probably Sandown. Winton, I think, as we've discussed, has limited application, so I probably haven't driven there as much as the other tracks. And I will get around to purchasing the Bend and giving that a pretty good go in the future.
Well, you've heard it there, folks. That's Australian tracks in iRacing, and kind of from an Australian. Brendon, we've heard the pros and cons of each, I suppose, and a little bit about them. So I just want to touch base on something we've not talked about really, which is the Australian cars, sports cars that are on iRacing. Pretty limited. I know is it the Australian touring cars that are on iRacing. So how do you feel that they're represented?
Well, the current Gen 3 V8 supercar, which was released on iRacing a couple of seasons ago, that's obviously the most well-known one. Previous to that, we had the Commodores and Mustangs for the ZB Commodore. That's the previous generation V8 supercar, which is now our second tier series. It's called the Dunlop Super 2 series. It's kind of a feeder category for the main V8 supercar series. But we have a lot of other motorsport series in Australia that use cars from all over. We have an Australian Porsche Carrera Cup, which is the 992 Cup car. That's a very strong series in Australia. We actually have a Radical Cup. I know you're a fan of the Radical.
Yep.
So we do not a whole bunch of cars, but certainly there is a Radical SR10 series in Australia. Formula Ford is strong, which is the FF1600. And of course your club level motorsport, which is run what you brung, basically. And typically that's run by car clubs, and they're doing time trials and sprint series. But there's lots of other different series that are popping up here and there. The TA2 or Trans Am series is becoming quite popular. Pardon me. We did have a TCR series running, but it kind of didn't gain any traction for some reason. Not 100% sure why. I don't think the types of cars that they're using for that series are hugely popular in this country. So perhaps we just didn't have that affinity with its road-going counterpart to really get excited by it.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
Okay, so we're going to move on now to a section which is all about Australian tracks and maybe future ones for iRacing or ones you feel should be on there. Now, the only one that I've heard iRacing talk about, I think, was the Adelaide Street Circuit scan that they keep teasing with.
Hmm. So iRacing did scan the Adelaide Street Circuit last November. The Adelaide 500 is held every November. It's the last race of this V8 Supercar calendar, the big finale. So that will be happening again this coming November. It utilises part of the old Australian Formula One track from the 80s and 90s. It's a shortened version of it, but it's still a fantastic track. The big standouts for Adelaide are Turn 8, which is a sweeping right-hander at close to top speed as you can muster the courage to do. But if you go wide, you're into the wall and it will eat your car in seconds. Every year, 2 or 3 people hit that wall and it just ends their weekend.
Keeps the mechanics busy.
Yeah. From an iRacing perspective, that's one feature of it. But I think the other probably big thing that people are going to get a lot of enjoyment out of is what they call the staircase, which is a series of 90-degree left and right with a little short squirt in between. So you've got about 3 or 4 or even 5 complete 90-degree changes, directions, passing opportunities, with a little sprint in between them. So that's going to introduce a lot of really good braking maneuvers, overtakes, side-by-side racing. That section of the track will be a lot of fun.
It sounds it already. I enjoy all the current street circuits in iRacing. Chicago, for me, is probably one that's not utilised so much, but a really good challenge. I don't know if you've ever raced around Chicago Street Circuit. It's got some hoardings that are pointing towards you. There's like an offshoot that goes nowhere where they park a safety car, and you can easily get confused if you're in an intense battle with somebody and take the wrong line. And it's like all the other street circuits. There's no runoffs. You've just got concrete and a piece of plywood in front of it with somebody's logo on. So yeah, it's another risk and reward. So I enjoy those because of the specific challenge it gives. But no, I hope if they scanned it last November, what they had nearly a year, maybe that's something we might get for the first build of 2026. Yeah, fingers
crossed.
And I'll definitely be on it, buddy. So maybe we'll jump in the race 1600 and have a blast together around there in a race. Who knows?
Can't wait.
So, what other tracks then would you think would be a good fit for iRacing in Australia?
Well, look, I mean, obviously the really good tracks in Australia are all V8 supercar rounds. So the ones that are missing would be, there is one track in Western Australia that, well, it's not called Barbagallo anymore, but that's what everyone knows it as. It's a relatively short track that is, I think it's only 6 turns, but it's got a lot of elevation change. The surface is always really sandy, so that can catch them out. I don't know whether it would translate well into iRacing, but it would certainly be popular, I think, at least amongst Australians. As far as a good track for iRacing, I think probably the one they will have their eye on next would be Sydney Motorsport Park. It has a lot of different layouts, very similar to the Bend. It's got one very, very long layout, which twists and turns around the back section for much longer than the usual layout that is used. And it's also got a very, very fast sweeping left-hand turn one at the end of a long straight, much like Oran Park. In fact, it's very, very much like Oran Park in that regard. That first turn does reward bravery. If anything, it's probably a little easier than turn one at Oran Park because it does straighten out afterwards before it gets to the sharp turn. But that is a doozy as well. Another track that would be interesting would be Symonds Plains in Tasmania. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one.
Never heard of it.
Nah, it's another old track that replaced the circuit at Longford, which was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. In the off season, a lot of the Formula One drivers would come down to this little town in Tasmania called Longford, where they had a motorsport festival, and all the Formula drivers would go there just because they had time on their hands. And that was a fantastic circuit. Sadly not there anymore. Symonds Plains replaced it. The thing about Symonds Plains is it's got one of the tightest hairpins you have ever seen at the end of a long straight. So that's always dive bomb central. The other unique thing about Symonds Plains is the start-finish line is not on a straight. It's between two turns that's possibly, 10, 15 cars long. So at the starting grid goes all the way back and around the corner and away you go. So it's a very unique track.
Bit like start of the Nordish Life, which is just like one of the shorter. You round the bend on a full grid.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is a good thing for me. It's why does it need to be this straight? Who made those rules? Brilliant. So we've any other track then that? So we've talked about a couple already. What would you say would be a strong track? Let's say iRacing start to expand if they gain licenses. Let's say for F1 style cars.
Well, obviously the Melbourne Formula One GP track at Albert Park. I understand why they haven't done that one. There's the FIA have a pretty tight rein on the tracks that the Formula One cars use. I know there is some crossover in iRacing with the tracks that are more privately owned, like Spa and Hockenheim and places like that. But certainly, if iRacing were able to make that partnership with Formula One, the possibility of having a Melbourne GP circuit would be fantastic. So that would be a great addition. I just can't see it happening. I think they've got their dedicated Formula One games, if you like, and that's where that track is. It's the only place you can race it, other than an offline sim where somebody's created it as a mod, but certainly as an online competitive thing. That's about the only place you're going to be able to do it, I think.
Okay, so that's another brilliant insight into potentially tracks of the future, Australian-based listeners and viewers. So general talking about iRacing. Then obviously we're here today because we're iRacing enthusiasts. Shall we call ourselves? We love
Definitely.
We love the challenge and what it brings. So what makes iRacing so popular in Australia then?
I think for the same reasons it's popular everywhere. I think iRacing, from a competitive standpoint, is the best there is. It's not trying to be something that it's not. It's all about the competition. Certainly the physics and the simulation side of it needs to be right, and for the most part, it is. But the way they've built it around simulating the competitiveness, I think, is what really shines with iRacing. You're not always thrown randomly into a lobby with whoever's just showed up. It is tried to be a little bit matchmaked to your skill level based on your I rating and your safety rating. And also, I think having scheduled start times for the events is a really, really good method as well. Rather than, okay, I want to join this lobby and it just sits there and waits until enough people show up. I think that's probably not a great way of doing it. So the fact that you've got, yes, we're going to start a session at 4:15 and 5:15 and 6:15 or whatever series that you're in, however many people sign up for it as they want, and it calculates the splits and off you go.
Yeah, no, I've never experienced a simulator that brings community people from around the globe together at set times, and it's popular in your local time zones. And if you're a night shift worker or if you're just up and about, you can jump on iRacing anytime and find a competitive series that is going to give you that hit that you need of competition.
And I think also their inclusion of a lot of Australian tracks, Australian supercars, that's gone a long way as well. And Australians are just really, really competitive by nature for the most part.
So, Brendon did reach out to me, as viewers and listeners will know. I was looking for a bit of a co-host to join. So, Brendon is one person that has reached out to me and is quite happy. And this is the introduction today to just some snippets. Might not be every week. It's up to Brendon, but Brendon, I think that's been a wonderful insight into the Australian tracks, the potential tracks, who you are as a person and a fellow iRacer. So I really enjoyed your company today. What do you think the podcast is bringing to the listeners and the viewers?
Well, look, I've certainly been listening to your podcast for quite some time. I tend to listen to it in the car on the way to work rather than sort of sit down and watching it on YouTube, but everyone digests their content differently. I just find it interesting to hear your opinion on certain things, your reporting on what's coming up. It's a good way to digest the news of iRacing specifically, I suppose. You are very narrow focused on iRacing itself rather than trying to bring in news and stories from all different parts of the hobby. So it's more of a specific, I want to hear about this topic type thing, and I enjoy that.
Wonderful. Well, listening viewers, I'm sure we'll see more of Brendon in the future. That's it for today's episode of the Lone Road iRacing podcast. Huge thanks to Brendon McDonough. I hope I've said that right, Brendon, for joining me today. If you enjoyed the chat, make sure you share the podcast with your fellow iRacers, drop some reviews, and catch us next week as we dive into some other topics. I'll see you on the track soon. Brendon, I'm going to let you have the final say of this week's podcast.
Thanks for having me, Guy. Check out my YouTube channel, Plus 50 Gaming. There's lots of sim racing videos in there, especially if you want to see this thing behind me in action.
Excellent. I'll see you on the track soon, Brendon.
See ya.
Whatever it takes, we're racing, we're in the zone. engines roar, hear me now. We're racing circles, got a hustle, made a vow. Chasing victory, it's all or nothing on the track. Sweet is my motto, nothing's ever holding back. Whatever it takes.